Default Texty dragged him out of his car, slammed him with false charges until he exposed who he really was. Late at night in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, the streets were mostly quiet, except for the occasional hum of traffic lights flickering from red to green. Jamal Winslow, a seasoned assistant U.S. attorney, had just left a dinner with colleagues. He wasn't thinking about work, injustice, or courtrooms just home. That all changed when he saw flashing red and blue lights in his rearview mirror. Sighing, he signaled, pulled over, and reached for his wallet. He wasn't speeding. He hadn't run a light. There was no reason for a stop, but he knew better than to assume reason had anything to do with it. Two officers approached his window. Officer Kyle Driscoll, broad, with a military cut, stood at the driver's side. Officer Brent Kessler, leaner but just as imposing, hovered near the passenger door. "License and registration," Driscoll said, his voice clipped. Jamal handed over his documents. "May I ask why I was stopped?" Driscoll glanced at Kessler before answering. "Your tail lights out." Jamal frowned. That was a lie. His car had just passed inspection, and the reflection in the rearview mirror showed his brake lights working fine. "Are you sure about that?" Jamal asked, keeping his voice even. Driscoll's expression shifted slightly. He leaned in. "Sir, step out of the vehicle." A slow tension crept through Jamal's limbs. He'd prosecuted cases like this before where a routine stop became something far worse. His instinct told him to comply, but his experience told him these officers were already escalating. "I'm not stepping out until you tell me why." Kessler smirked, resting his hand on his belt. "Because we said so." Jamal took a breath. He knew the law, had spent years studying, enforcing, and defending it. He knew he didn't have to get out of the car unless there was probable cause. "I'm within my rights to ask why I'm being ordered out of my car." Driscoll's patience snapped. He yanked the door open. "Step out, now." Before Jamal could react, Driscoll grabbed his wrist, yanking him forward. The seatbelt caught his chest, digging into his shoulder. "What the hell are you doing?" Jamal barked, instinctively pulling back. Driscoll didn't answer. He just grabbed harder. Within seconds, Kessler was on the other side, wrenching Jamal's arm behind his back. The sharp edge of metal cuffs dug into his skin. "You're resisting," Driscoll said coldly. Jamal stared in disbelief as Kessler pressed him against the hood of his own car. His heart pounded not from fear, but from rage. This was a setup. They thought they had already won. They were about to realize how wrong they were. The courtroom in East Baton Rouge Parish Courthouse was packed. The air was thick with routine clerks shuffling papers, the occasional cough, hushed whispers. But beneath that, something else simmered. Jamal Winslow sat at the defense table, rigid but composed. He wasn't here as an attorney today. He was the defendant, the charges. Resisting arrest, obstruction, disorderly conduct, complete fabrications. Jamal already knew the truth didn't matter, only what could be proven. At the front of the room, Judge Margaret Holloway peered down from the bench. In her mid-60s, she had a reputation firm, uncompromising, dismissive of nonsense. And from the way she barely looked at him, Jamal already knew where this was going. The prosecutor, Richard Calloway, walked with confidence, the kind that came from knowing the odds were in his favor. He straightened his tie, nodding to the officers sitting proudly at the witness stand. "Your Honor," Calloway began, "this is a simple case of an individual escalating a routine traffic stop into a physical altercation with law enforcement." Jamal exhaled slowly. The arrogance, the audacity. Calloway continued, flipping through his notes. The defendant refused to comply with officers' lawful orders, became aggressive, and had to be restrained for the safety of all involved. Jamal's lawyer, Thomas Rivera, an overworked and underpaid public defender, shot up from his chair. "Objection. There is zero evidence my client was aggressive." Judge Holloway waved a hand dismissively. "Overruled." Jamal clenched his jaw. That was fast. Rivera sighed but pressed forward. "Your Honor, the officers escalated the situation without just cause." There's no body cam footage showing my client acting aggressively because no such footage exists. Calloway smirked. Body cams were not operational at the time of the arrest, but the officer's statements are more than enough evidence. Jamal almost laughed at the absurdity. The officer's word was all they needed. Convenient. Driscoll took the stand first, delivering his well-rehearsed lines. The defendant was combative from the start. He said smoothly. Refused to exit the vehicle, raised his voice. Created a hostile situation, lies, every word. Kessler followed up, nodding along. He tensed up. We feared for our safety. We had no choice but to restrain him. More lies. Jamal's fingers curled into fists under the table. He had spent his entire career fighting against this kind of corruption, and now he was living it firsthand. Judge Holloway barely hid her impatience. Anything else, Mr. Rivera? Rivera hesitated. He knew this judge. Knew her track record. She wasn't interested in fairness. Still, he swallowed hard and pushed forward. Yes, Your Honor. The defense calls Jamal Winslow to the stand. Jamal rose, walking to the witness stand. Every pair of eyes was on him, watching, judging, waiting to see if he would break. He wouldn't, not now, not ever. As he took his seat, Calloway smirked, pacing slightly. Mr. Winslow, would you say you complied with the officer's instructions during your traffic stop? Jamal met his gaze, calm, controlled. I asked why I was being ordered out of my car. That's not illegal. Calloway feigned a sigh. You refused to exit, correct? I asked why, Jamal repeated. Which legally, I have the right to do. Calloway smirked at the jury, as if Jamal's intelligence was an inconvenience. And after multiple orders, you still didn't comply. Jamal leaned forward. Before we go any further, I should probably disclose something. Silence. Calloway hesitated. Even Judge Holloway looked up. Jamal reached into his briefcase. Rivera tensed. Slowly, Jamal pulled out his badge's small, simple rectangle that had suddenly become the most dangerous thing in this courtroom. I'm Jamal Winslow, he said, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. Assistant U.S. Attorney for the Southern District. The room froze. The case wasn't just about him anymore. It was about all the others who had been silenced. And now, the whole world was watching. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe to Unfolded Tales Explained and hit the bell icon to stay updated with more thought-provoking stories.